Settle down, brother. This is the Quarter Report. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. It's Saturday. We just wanted to watch the Springboks in peace and try to stay warm and dry. But the Democratic Alliance has announced that they will be withdrawing from the national dialogue, actively fighting against President Ramaphosa, the leader of the government that they are in, as the second biggest coalition partner of the Government of National Unity, to try and stop the national dialogue from happening. They are also, they say, going to vote in Parliament to stop any acts by two departments, human settlements and higher education. It is an enormous moment where the Democratic Alliance has essentially said that they are going to act as basically opposition, explicit opposition now, not just complaining or going to court like against Bela or the NHI or the Expropriation Act, that they were going to fight against the ANC-led GNU in Parliament, in government, in votes, as though they were the opposition until the president stops the national dialogue and until the president gets rid of these two, I will remind you, ANC ministers. Let's start at the start. How did we get into this situation in the first place? President Ramaphosa, 2 days ago, announced that he had fired a DA deployee, Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield. He was a deputy in one of the government ministries, and Ramaphosa's explanation for firing him was that Whitfield had taken an unsanctioned trip to the United States of America, where on this trip he had spoken to a bunch of bigwigs from the American administration, and Ramaphosa was upset about this. Now, I will say a few things at the start, and there's a lot of factual fighting over what really happened. One, as Ramaphosa pointed out, any minister or deputy minister has to be given permission, has to ask for permission and be given permission by the president for international travel. And if the president does not give them permission and they travel unsanctioned, they could be liable. There is precedent to fire them. This has happened twice before in different administrations in the New South Africa, including to none other than Winnie Madikizela Mandela. So it is not unprecedented. But in response, you have to ask, well, Whitfield traveled in March. It's now, what is it, James? Nearly the end of June? How did we get to this position where it's so far after that he got fired? And then it depends on who you ask, because Whitfield says that he requested every day for like 9 days an answer to whether or not he could travel from Ramaphosa's office, and was just not responded to. And so went anyway, but Ramaphosa's office and the ANC says that he was told he couldn't go. And in fact, another DA member who's a full-on Minister of the Environment, Deon George, asked for permission to go on the same trip, and then he ended up not going. So what does that mean? Maybe it means Deon George had more sense than Andrew Whitfield to not cross the president on this and not travel. But maybe it means that Deon George actually got told you can't go, and maybe Andrew Whitfield did too. Or it means that Deon George got no response like Andrew Whitfield claims that he got, and just decided to play it safe. Nonetheless, here's the next thing that was fought about. The DA has acted for the last 48 hours like this firing of Whitfield came as a shock to them, and it was inexplicable and made no sense. They say that Whitfield really got fired because he was causing trouble for the ANC, trying to stop dodgy deals going on in a department that was involved in the approving of the new lotteries tenders, one of which involves Deputy President Paul Mashatile's wife and a company that she's a part of. Now, the presidency says it's got nothing to do with that. He's just following precedent, and he's firing a minister who behaved improperly, as is precedent from previous administrations. Now, I will say that the president didn't have to fire Whitfield. Just because previous presidents did it doesn't mean that he had to, but he has space to do so. It is interesting that he would choose 2 months later to do it. Long and the short of it, whatever you believe about that mess, the DA then gave the president an ultimatum, 48 hours to do something, to fire Nkabane and Simelane, to undo the Whitfield thing, to basically apologize and go back on his position. The president said, lol, JK, I'm absolutely not going to do that, and released quite an extraordinary statement where he criticized leader of the DA, John Steenhuisen, for what he said as intemperate actions, which basically means you child, you're behaving ridiculously, you're immature, you're petulant, you're throwing a tantrum, sit down, in Ramaphosa president speak. That's what he said. And then we all waited to see what would happen. The ultimatum period passed. Ramaphosa did not do what the DA wanted, and then the DA called a press conference for 3 p.m. this afternoon. We're recording it just as it's ended. It's 18 minutes to 3 p.m. Steenhuisen has finished his pre-scripted address. And we were all waiting to see what the DA would do, because it's fair to say that they had to do something dramatic and severe and consequential, because when you release an ultimatum, that means that you are threatening somebody with serious consequences if they don't stick by your demands, if they don't heed your demands. And we were all wondering what the DA would do. Would they walk away from the GNU? There was some suggestion that they might consider doing that. Another suggestion, and some ITKs were claiming that they were going to suggest a motion of no confidence against the president, which is an extraordinary thing to do when you're in government with the president and his party, and would have caused a really massive political fallout that almost certainly would have led probably to Ramaphosa surviving the motion of no confidence, but definitely the DA getting evicted from the government of national unity. But we were sitting here wondering, like, the DA, we're pretty sure they don't want to walk away from the GNU. They've benefited extraordinarily from being within it. They love the power. They love their ministers being able to perform in ways that impress South Africa's people. They love the fact that their voters seeing them as being in the government in order to hold back the worst excesses of the ANC. And so you would think they're not going to walk away from this. Maybe they would enjoy being kicked out of it because that would work into their political narrative that the ANC is just kicking out opposition and enemies, but they certainly wouldn't walk away. So what could they possibly do? Because if they gave an ultimatum and then came with a damn squib threat or punishment that was barely anything, they would lose so much face. And the DA has already lost a lot of face in the last year. Every single time Ramaphosa has crossed what for the DA is a red line, like Bela Act, NHI, Expropriation Act, all these other kinds of moments where the DA has taken Ramaphosa and the ANC to court when they've tried to stop him, when they've said that he can't cross these lines. He's just ignored them and got away with it because he was betting that they would never walk away from power. So we were thinking, what are they going to do now that could be serious and severe enough? Because if they don't, they will look so weak, even in the eyes of their voters and supporters, and this will end really bad for them. They will look the fool. And then the press conference started, and Steenhuisen went through a litany of problems with Ramaphosa. Some of them, I think he has grounds for. Like, it's not just the DA's position that Thembi Simelane's serious state capture allegations against her from before the time that she was the justice minister should have had consequences for her ministry. She should at least have stepped aside, or maybe even been taken out of the ministry, out of the cabinet completely, while those allegations were resolved because they're credible and justifiable allegations. Instead, she was just switched to a different department, Human Settlements, in a straight swap where the Human Settlements Minister became Justice Minister, which was also extraordinary, by the way, because the current Human Settlements Minister, Simelane, who was Justice Minister, and the current Justice Minister have no legal training nor background whatsoever. For the first time in over 100 years, the Justice Minister of South Africa doesn't have any legal training. And you would think that the Justice Ministry in specific, that department needs to be led by somebody skilled enough to know how to run the justice system. But no matter, Simelane hasn't faced any serious consequences. She's just been reshuffled. This seems like good treatment of an ANC minister by an ANC president. And then Higher Education Minister Nkabane, we've covered this on previous episodes of the Quarter Report and the TV show. She, as I've already described, made some really dodgy appointments to SETA, undid those appointments, and then it seems lied to the country about having an advisory panel she didn't have, was incredibly disrespectful in a parliamentary process. All of these together are grounds to punish a minister. In fact, Ramaphosa's presidential team then said that Nkabane would be made to account directly to the president over her bad and dodgy behavior, but she's still there. And yet now, Whitfield did an unsanctioned trip 2 months ago, and he's been fired. The first person to be nixed from the Ramaphosa GNU cabinet. You can understand why they're upset. Now, I will say that waiting 2 months after Whitfield did it to then punish him seems odd. But I will also say that I wish and I support Nkabane and Simelane facing serious consequences for what they've done, or at least having those resolved, right? I understand the Nkabane matter just happened. You may want to take 2 to 3 weeks to properly investigate and find out the truth about whether or not she lied to the country and did dodgy appointments. But the Simelane thing has been running for months, and it's very clear that there are serious allegations that need to be resolved. I mean, come on. And so you can understand that. The DA going, this is just unfair treatment. But on the other hand, Whitfield did commit a transgression, and there is precedent for this kinds of punishment. So I can understand the presidency going, why on earth are you making a huge storm in a teacup about this ridiculous ultimatum? And it's interesting because as much as having your deputy minister fired is serious and a serious thing that a party needs to respond to, according to most reports, Ramaphosa contacted Steenhuisen and told him that Whitfield would be deposed and told Steenhuisen to elect another DA leader to take his place. So if that's true, he said to Steenhuisen, I'm going to deal with your guy and there'll be reputational damage, but you can anoint his successor and still have a balance of your DA leaders in government. And particularly after Liam Jacobs just left the DA for the PA and said the reason why he did that is that the DA hadn't put any colored leaders of the DA into parliament. This could have been an opportunity to do that. Now, clearly, Steenhuisen and them decided that they needed to respond to the core thing, which would be South Africans saying Ramaphosa has fired a DA member of the cabinet, a deputy minister, without consequences. And so we come to this press conference. What were they going to do? Well, turns out they didn't leave the GNU. We were right in speculating that. But what then could they do? And it started really damp squib. Like, I think I was already starting to write a tweet being like, wow, they this up. They have egg on their faces. They are the fools. You can't call an ultimatum. And then when the ultimatum period passes, say, we're just not going to do the national dialogue. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. But that was the first thing that Steenhuisen said that they would do. For those of you living under a rock, as I always say, the size of Brakpan, I should probably change that example at some point so as not to alienate Brakpan. The national dialogue is this big yap happening in communities across the country and with eminent leaders to allegedly find out what is going wrong with South Africa and create a new social pact for South Africans. Something we absolutely do not need. We don't need it. We don't need to go and find out what's wrong. We know what's wrong in this country. We know what's going wrong. It's very explicit. Ask a child of 5 or 6 what's going wrong. They could probably name at least 3 of corruption, service delivery disasters, potholes, electricity, crime, gender-based violence. The list goes on, stagnant economy. Even a 6-year-old, I think, could say, yo, no one's got jobs. Unemployment is a crisis. And so pulling out of the national dialogue just seemed extremely weak. Of course, it's costing over 700 million rand to do this, which for me is such unbelievable fruitless and wasteful expenditure and insane of the ANC to be doing, considering they want people's votes. But for the DA to now suddenly say they're anti the national dialogue, when clearly in the last few weeks they were fine with it, the 700 million, no, now they're going to fight against the national dialogue because Whitfield got fired. Weak. Egg on their faces, fools who should never have called an ultimatum. So I was thinking that, and then Steenhuisen said the big thing. He said, we are now going to act to stop any acts or developments in Parliament involving 2 departments. Human Settlements, which is Simelane's current department that she was shuffled to, and Higher Education, which is Nkabane's. And that's really big, because that's the DA saying we will actively vote against the GNU on matters involving those 2 departments until those ministers are fired. That's really interesting, because it means that the DA, for their voters and supporters, can say we're taking a principled stand against what we believe are corrupt ministers who really deserve to be punished, not Whitfield, in their minds. And it also means that in their function of voting against it, kind of like the budget, but more severe now, they're going to be acting as an opposition party involving those 2 departments, which is extraordinary. They tried to soften it to say we're still part of the GNU because they're going to vote with the GNU on everything else, including the budget. They're still playing that game because remember, the DA doesn't want to walk away. They think their supporters and fans and voters will be upset with them if they walk away because that will be seen as them rolling out the red carpet, literally, lol, for the EFF, for the MK party to go in and be in government with the ANC to make a majority. They will only leave the GNU if they are kicked from the GNU. But they are able to perform to their supporters that they're taking a principled stand against the bad ministers. Which is interesting, again, because I'll remind you, were they not going to do this before? Like before Whitfield got fired, were they just going to go along with Nkabane and Simelane? I understand the politics of it, but you're looking a little hypocritical and like you're just doing this for show when you make this kind of move. Although they might say that they would fight against them in other ways, but like this is clearly the way that they're going to do it to perform to the country that they're trying to do something about it. And that's so interesting for a few reasons. One, Ramaphosa now is in a bind because if he acts against Nkabane or Simelane, people are going to go, you DA stooge, you're acting on behalf of the DA, you are just doing what they tell you to do. It binds his hands potentially to punish these ministers who are in really poor standing and have serious allegations against them that the country wants resolutions to. And it would be bad for Ramaphosa to not act against these ministers, obviously, for the same reasons I just described. So the DA is quite clever strategically bound them there. And in particular, what it does, the other thing that it does, is not in the country, but in the ANC. Because there are lots of people in the ANC who have been advocating to kick the DA out of the GNU. And Ramaphosa and his faction have worked very hard to stop them and keep the DA in the GNU strategically for optics, amongst other reasons. They don't want to work with the EFF and the MK party. They want to maintain a majority. They believe that it would be better optically if the DA walked rather than if the ANC kicked them out for reasons that we've described on this podcast and others. And now it looks really bad, because if the DA explicitly starts acting as they said they will, as opposition against two departments of government in the government of national unity in parliament, it's going to be all the more galling, unacceptable, intolerable, unswallowable for the people in the ANC who want the DA to be kicked. And the lobby to get rid of them will get louder and louder within the ANC ranks and place more pressure on Cyril Ramaphosa. So it's a really interesting strategic move. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how the president responds to this. But it almost feels like the DA is begging, no, daring Ramaphosa to kick them out of the GNU. Because this is the level of behavior that should get someone kicked out of a government of national unity, right? There's going to be energy to try and get rid of them because they're going to be actively acting against the GNU, whether you agree with their reasons or not. It's going to make it so much harder for Ramaphosa to keep the ANC and his GNU partners, the other ones, in line of leaving the DA in and daring them to walk. Because what they're fighting over right now is the optics of who kicks who out of the GNU and who walks out of the GNU. It's a very smart and interesting move, even though I think it is possible to ignore it. And this is interesting, right? Ramaphosa has proven that he figured out that the DA would rather be in the GNU than not, that they would rather have power than not and be in the government than not, and that they can't be seen, in their opinion, to walk away in the eyes of their voters and supporters. And so Ramaphosa could do what Zuma's just done to Floyd Shivambu, and Malema has done too. Just ignore him. Just ignore him. Let them have their tantrum. Let them vote against acts of those two departments. Maybe choose not to put any acts of those two departments through parliament. Let them have their tantrum and show them to be impotent and weak by going, cool, throw your stroppy. We'll just ignore you and get on with the functions of government and try to flip it on them. And I think Ramaphosa would love to do that. And he has done that many times in the last year, and it's worked very well. The difference is, this time, might be a difference, is whether or not the internal ANC lobby that will definitely be outraged by this latest DA move will get loud enough to force Ramaphosa to act differently in future. And then Steenhuisen ended on like, we were considering doing a vote of no confidence. If the president keeps going in this way, we will consider doing one in future. I think that was lip service to make South Africans feel like they considered doing something really bombshell while not actually doing it, in my opinion. Maybe the DA's FedEx did really meet at 1 p.m. this afternoon, 2 hours before this address, and seriously consider it. But I don't think so. I think that was lip service to tell South Africans that the DA was serious, even though they were not calling a vote of no confidence, and even though they were not walking away from the government of national unity. I don't know if this seriously means that a vote of no confidence is coming in Ramaphosa, called for by the DA. Also, they would almost certainly lose a vote of no confidence as the current bean counting in Parliament stands. And again, a fundamental problem that the DA has is that the DA, whether they wanted it or not, prefer Ramaphosa being the president rather than Ramaphosa being the president with MK or EFF or just not the DA. They prefer Ramaphosa being president to anybody else, so long as excluding them.
And I think the other thing about this situation is the fact that we are still, despite the fact that we are in the GNU era of South African politics, we are still being subjected to ANC internal politics over everything else. And I think that's really sad, because I think that the hope with this new era of maturing in South African politics is the fact that ANC internal politics would be less effective and have less of a weight. But they clearly do. They clearly do.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I'm disappointed by that.
You're absolutely right. And I think that the ANC internal politics will remain the real politics of this country, the real parliament of this country, until at least 2029, if they fall dramatically again. But we'll wait and see. Okay. We think we'll be back on Tuesday, but if another crazy thing happens, there'll be another emergency podcast. Hell, maybe even tonight. James and I have evening plans, but maybe even tonight. We will wait and see. We can't wait to hear what you think about everything that we've discussed. The WhatsApp line is there for you. The number is 0607 613436. That's how you become a recorder in the Quarter Report community. See you maybe Tuesday, maybe later tonight.